We'll talk about something different today, and that is mental prayer, which is very much a part of your lives, very important. First, the notion of prayer in general. Prayer, St. John Damascene gives the very well-known definition of elevation of the soul to God. So, St. John Damascene. In prayer, the soul leaves behind the thoughts of earth, even those which are good and useful at other times. See, and that's one of the reasons why contact with your family is somewhat restricted. And not that your family is bad. It's just that you are here as a sort of a very long retreat, and the things of the world, even family things and secular things, distract you from keeping your mind on the things of God. You are here to turn your minds to God. And so even good and ordinary secular things are a distraction. That's why there's a certain limitation of it. If you were in religious life, there's novices. I don't think they ever see it once a year or something. That's the reason for it. It's not to say that families are bad. It's to say that it's the world. It's the secular world. So, prayer is to look affectionately at God. These are very important definitions. To look affectionately at God. It is to enter into a conversation with God. That's both from St. Gregory of Nyssa and St. John Chrysostom. And God listens to us as a father would listen to his child, and he responds to us by granting us interior lights and affections. See, he doesn't talk in words. He talks by interior lights and affections. In other words, drawing you away from worldly things and fixing your will on supernatural, spiritual things. That's the effect of prayer. And that's why it's so important. Is that it's orienting yourself toward God, both by your intellect and by your will. It's turning you. By the influence of God. In other words, it's not what you're doing. It's how God is drawing you, and you are simply disposing yourself to listening to Him and to following His inspirations. Also by His grace. That's why St. Alphonsus says that mental prayer and mortal sin cannot coexist. That if you undertake mental prayer, the sin will necessarily be broken. It will go away. Or if you sin, you cannot do mental prayer. If you have love sin, you cannot do mental prayer. That doesn't mean that if you commit a mortal sin and repent. But if you love sin, as St. Bernadette called the sinner, though this a person who loves sin, that's the definition of a sinner, that is incompatible. One or the other will go. Either the life of sin will go or the mental prayer will go. St. Alphonsus says one or the other will prevail. So a habit of mental prayer is a very, very strong antidote against habits of sin. All kinds of sin, whether mortal or venial. And that's why St. Pius X in Haerent Animo, his encyclical on the priesthood, insists on the daily meditation of priests. You can see from this reading that we're doing how priests went astray in their thinking, and when that happens to priests, he's a disaster because he has so much power. So if he goes astray, everyone goes astray with him. And if he happens to be a big priest, like a cardinal or a pope, then a whole bunch of people go astray with him. Prayer does four things. It adores the divine majesty, which is first and foremost. Secondly, it asks pardon for sin and confesses its faults before God. So it's an act of humility and penance. It's like the publican in the temple, beating his breast in the back of the temple. It thanks God for favors received. That's important to do. And it begs God for new graces, both temporal and spiritual. So that's prayer in general, all prayer, but especially mental prayer. So vocal prayer is made by using words or signs. So you can pray by gesture, like the sign of the cross, or the many gestures of the sacred liturgy. Genuflecting is in that way. It's a recognition of the real presence and the divinity of Christ. Bowing, Gloria Patri, bowing. Vocal prayers are very useful and even necessary and obligatory. So you do a great deal of vocal prayer. The breviary is vocal, obviously. That's why you must move your lips when you're saying it privately, because it is vocal prayer. Only the Franciscans have the right to say it mentally. Don't ask me why. Various permissions that were obtained. Somewhere along the line, Spain got exempted from the Friday abstinence. I don't know how that happened, but it did. They also got the permission to use blue vestments for Our Lady's feasts, but not their colonies, just Spain. So, and then Austria got the permission to, if you're traveling or eating in a restaurant in Austria, you dispense from the Friday abstinence. So try to arrange your visits to Austria on Fridays. And I told that to a priest from Germany. He says, "Oh, that's true in Bavaria too." So I never saw it for Bavaria, but I saw it in print for Austria. So I happened to be there. I happened to arrive on a Thursday night or something in Austria. Friday morning, I said, "This is Austria. We're going to have ham." So it was in a hotel. I was traveling in Austria. So anyway, in vocal prayer, we must pay attention, as in all prayer. St. Thomas says, if anyone is voluntarily distracted in prayer, any kind of prayer, it is a sin, and that hinders the fruit of the prayer. So voluntary distractions are a sin. Seldom do we have voluntary distractions, in the sense that you purposely and consciously think of something else than what you should be thinking about in the prayer. That's rare in a pious person. It might not be rare in a person of let's say, not very pious, who goes to Mass just to see a girlfriend or something like that, and stares over at the girlfriend, while he's attending Mass. That happens, and that's a voluntary distraction, and that would be a sin. It could be mortal if you did it for the entire Mass, and including the missed Mass because of that, because of a purposeful retraction of your attention from the Mass. It could be. But in most cases, distractions are involuntary. Your mind wanders. However, it is morally impossible that our attention be always actual. It suffices that the will to pray persevere. So that persevere without any retraction of it, without any stoppage of it. So you intend to pray, even implicitly, when you pick up the book to sing prime. You're intending to pray, and that must persevere without any conscious or purposeful interruption. That's sufficient. This will to pray is suspended only if we consent to a distraction freely. So you might have an involuntary distraction. And you know that when you return to your prayer, realizing that you're in a distraction. Therefore, according to St. Thomas, in order that vocal prayer be meritorious and obtain its effect, it is not necessary that the attention remain actual to the end. It suffices that it began with an attention which is not afterwards retracted by a voluntary distraction. So that should make you feel a little better. But, which is the magic conjunction, distracted prayer, even if not sinful, does not nourish the soul as much as attentive prayer. St. Gregory said, God does not listen to those who, while praying, do not listen to themselves. So imagine if you were talking to somebody without even paying attention to what you were saying. just babbling. See, so ideally, that active and actual attention to prayer is the best. It is therefore very important to commence vocal prayer well and to preserve an actual intention. That's why there is recommended before the office the Aperi Domine. That's what happens at Vespers when the priest comes in and he kneels for a minute. He's saying the Aperi Domine, which is a prayer for reciting the office well. The ways of doing this are, one, to put ourselves in the presence of God, and at the same time withdrawing ourselves from the world. Two, at certain fixed times to renew our attention. And three, to look at the tabernacle or the crucifix or a holy picture, speaking to God as if we saw Him. Now, mental prayer. The definition of mental prayer is an interior and silent prayer by which the soul raises itself to God without the aid of words or formulas, in order to discharge its duty towards Him and to become better. Increase in virtue. And you probably know that there is such a thing as active mental prayer and passive or mystical mental prayer. All mental prayer requires the grace of God. Very important. However, sometimes the soul's activity is more manifest, and sometimes God's action is more manifest. In active prayer, the soul's action is more evident, whereas in passive prayer, God's action is more evident. So, looking first at ordinary or active mental prayer. Active prayer is that by which a person raises his mind to God by considerations or by a simple look, and his will by pious affections, petitions, and resolutions. So essentially by thinking about God, you are going to be moved to make interior acts of love of God. And you're going to have some prayer of petition, usually about some spiritual progress, some virtue, or the overcoming of some vice. And resolutions to avoid something or to try harder to do something, etc. God gives interior grace to the soul, and the soul responds by turning toward Him in mental prayer. So in that sense, it's very simple. There are two operations in mental prayer. One belongs to the intellect, which applies the imagination, the memory, and the understanding to consider some truth or mystery. So all of those faculties will be used in that. And the idea is to turn the mystery over and over, to convince yourself of it, and to penetrate it. So there's a great deal of active faith in it. It's a deepening of the faith. The second operation is of the will, which is to love, to desire, and ask the good proposed by the mind, and to make resolutions to arrive at it. So it involves both the intellect and the will, really all the faculties of the soul. The considerations are not purely speculative, but are meant to inflame the heart and to set the will in motion. So meditation should lead to love and action. It's not merely a theological discussion.